Both installments of Dragon's Dogma kind of have shitty stories and worlds that don't really feel as intricately thought out as some other open world RPGs, but that's not really what people like about these games. Dragon's Dogma's whole shtick, what most other games don't do, is the pawn system. If you've never played a Dragon's Dogma game and you don't know what I'm talking about, pawns are player-made characters that fight by your side. You can make your own guy and then hire up to 2 other pawns to have in your party. The pawn system is a highly marketable gimmick. This isn't to say that Dragon's Dogma is only worth playing because of the pawn system, but people play this game just to create and fuck around with pawns. There's even a free demo on Steam for Dragon's Dogma 2, which is just the character and pawn creation menu. The pawn system is what got me and so many others into Dragon's Dogma 1 when it first came out, because the idea of it is super appealing. Having a harem of big-titted goth girls in your party, or dumbass meme characters all made by other players, is a really neat concept. It helps to add a sense of multiplayer-esque community to what is otherwise a single-player action game. But I think I like the idea of a pawn system more than I like it in execution, because the pawn system is fundamentally at odds with another core aspect of the game, the combat. In a recent playthrough to prepare for the upcoming Snow DLC, I found myself trying the game with just a single pawn, and I've even dabbled going solo. And in many ways, doing that makes the combat in the game so much more enjoyable. If you're just playing through the game normally with a full party of pawns, you can get away with just mashing buttons and doing whatever, because the pawns act as autonomous safety nets, constantly correcting your mistakes. They draw aggro, deal damage while you're knocked over, heal you, bring downed allies to you, exploit weaknesses, and generally keep the fight moving, whether you're contributing anything useful or not. Please don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the pawn system is worthless. It has led to some really cool emergent moments that only could have come through letting your pawns do their thing. Combat can feel chaotic and exciting when you see your AI friends do shit on their own. Boss fights can seem especially tense when your pawns die and need to be revived, or super hype when you see them blast enemies to pieces with a meteor shower or an ice pillar or something, and it can feel especially satisfying when they keep the enemy distracted long enough for you to land the finishing blow. However, combat can often kinda just turn into noise because pawns actively help to correct your mistakes. The player is technically participating in battle, but isn't necessarily responsible for how the battle plays out. I say necessarily because yes, I know that if you're a god gamer, you can just wipe everything out without your pawns doing barely anything. But if you're such a god gamer that you can wipe out enemies before your pawns can do shit, then what was the point of the pawn system? In that case, the pawn system would then become a hindrance to player agency because they would muddy the flow of combat. Take the pawns away and every enemy demands your full attention. Now you have to carefully watch enemy movements and wait for or make your own openings, manage your stamina more carefully, decide more carefully when to block or dodge, and make sure you're not positioning yourself somewhere that'll come back to bite you in the ass. Even basic ass encounters like wolves or goblins will demand a lot more from you, the player, which is what video games do better than most other art mediums, forcing you to engage and interact with mechanics. Of course, playing without pawns is going against what the game intends. Even though it might make combat much more enjoyable at many points, the game is balanced around having pawns with you, or at least just your main one. First off, the story outright doesn't make sense if you don't have your pawn around, as they play a key role in certain cutscenes. Encumbrance can become a major pain in the ass because you can't offload your heavy stuff to party members. Some enemies are just fucking slogs to deal with if you don't have skills or magic or items to exploit weaknesses, and if you get caught in a command grab and have no pawns to free you, have fun sitting on your ass staying in the enemy's clutches for like 30 seconds at a time. For all intents and purposes, the developers intended for you to have at least your main pawn by your side. The pawns add a lot to the game. I'm fond of these little guys because they add personality and spectacle. They even help to add a sense of adventure, but they also dilute the part that requires you to actually play the video game. You could argue that learning to maneuver and give them orders with these buttons here is its own task, but they're largely programmed to act on their own. The combat in these games is fun when you're engaging more closely with it. This is an Itsuno game after all. So if you happen to find yourself getting bored of how easy the fights are in these games, I recommend you throw your pawns off a cliff and go exploring alone. There's something wrong here though. The action combat in Dragon's Dogma by itself doesn't reach the heights that Bayo, Ninja Gaiden, DMC, or God Hand do. Imagine if these games had no pawn or party system. What are you left with? The level design and exploration is nothing special. The world is nothing special. The story in both games fucking suck ass. The graphics are pretty good, but banking on realism is never a safe bet. All you're left with is just a decent action game. In other words, without the pawn system, the Dragon's Dogma games would be forgettable. This means that the pawn system is paramount for this game to stand out amongst its peers. But the problem is, like I said in the beginning, the pawn system clashes with the combat, which is the only other strength these games really have. Part of me wants Capcom to take the game in a different direction. Lean much more heavily into the pawns. Make your Arisen a shitty defenseless fighter who can't do anything but order pawns around. Playing as a support class like a mage or that one illusion class helps to scratch this itch, but it doesn't fully commit to that idea. I want Capcom to go even further in this direction. Why not make the Arisen watch the battlefield from afar? Tell your fighter to hold a choke point, and your archer to target a weak point, and your rogue to sneak up from behind. Why not? I'll tell you why. Because what I'm asking for is essentially an isometric RPG or an RTS. I'd just be getting Fire Emblem or StarCraft, which is why the longer I go down this train of thought, the more it brings me back to my appreciation of these games. Dragon's Dogma is fundamentally flawed, that's for sure, with two core systems at odds with each other, but it has a sizable audience for a reason. It might not be DMC, but DMC doesn't let you make a kawaii GF to fight alongside.